There we go, Juanita. Okay. And you were going to mention something about Donald here, some things that you remember. What's one of them?
One of them was, I used to come down over, we lived in Alden, and I would ride the train down to Lakefield, and Henrietta would pick me up. And you know, my nieces and nephews were my age to begin with.
Yeah.
And I would be there a lot of times over Christmas for 2 weeks. And anyway, we were invited over either to Rosso's or one of the craft places for a party. And so we were all there, and it was getting late, and I remember that Donald, he was standing against the wall like this, sleeping, standing up. And I never, ever forgot that whenever I think of Donald.
I had to milk too many cows there. It was a trouble.
But I remember that about Donald. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
And I don't even hardly remember that. I thought I was
Well,
always normal.
But now, Juanita, that explains something, because he has a daughter named Patrice, and she used to sit at the dinner table when she was 6 and 7 years old, and we wouldn't even be done eating. She'd be sitting upright, always had a smile, still does to this day, sleeping, stone cold asleep, sitting up at the dinner table. Never seen that before, so now I know where I got
I think she inherited from her father.
I think so. Oh, and I was her father, yeah, that's right.
Did you ever spend, Juanita, any summers on the farm over there near Lakefield with the harvesting? Did you ever get in on anything like that, or was that by Wyndham?
No, I was never over there during the summer months. It was usually in the winter. Well, that's the only way I knew my nieces and nephews. And, of course, Henrietta was my sister, and I had to know her, too. And you see, there's 20-some years between Henrietta and I.
Yes.
I got to tell you a deal. When we lived down there in Hollandale, we lived down there, you know, by Maple Island, and you were through the woods back there.
Right.
Well, this here truck comes by, and I was sitting out on the side there, and it was a big truck, and they were fixing some lines or something. And a guy, he reaches up to fix that line, and the doggone electricity got him, and he's smoking, laying up on the truck, and I wasn't very old. I seen him there, and they killed the guy right there in front of me.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Never heard that.
It went right in front of our place there, and then there was a line there, and the guy reached up or something, you know, to
And he
do
touched
something
ground.
with
He
it.
touched
Yeah,
ground.
Yeah, and by golly, he killed him right on the truck, and he started to smoke on there and was laying up
Oh,
on it.
my. You don't
I run in
remember.
the house, and I told Ma, you know, about that guy, something happened to him there. And
How old do you think you
well,
were?
I was, I started, I think 6 years old when we moved away there, so I would have been about 5, I suppose, 4 or 5, and then you lived back in the...
Now, Juanita,
Yes, sir.
why were you living there too? Did you move to Hollandale?
They were there
because you
ahead of
guys
us.
went together.
Yeah.
Oh, you were there first.
Yeah.
See, Roy moved down there too to raise potatoes and stuff, and I think
Okay.
he was, wasn't he?
Yeah,
Or you were down
yeah.
there first, and then Roy come back to Wyndham after a while, and then...
Yeah. Well, it was a land company, and they sold.
That's right.
And that land company had a ridiculous price
Yeah.
on this land.
Yeah.
And the farmers bought, moved in there, and we all ended up losing the land.
Losing the land. My dad talked about it.
Uh-oh.
They ended up, there were a bunch of crooks, and then they had a, that's when they come back to Lakefield, then they
Because
moved
you
out
got
of there.
skunked out over there.
3 years of in there, and that time it was all potatoes, it was peat ground.
Yeah.
Now, we drove through there last year one time to, we drove down, cleaned down to Hollandale and stuff, and now that's raised corn and soybeans there. They don't raise no more potatoes there like they used to them days.
Yeah.
Them days it was all potatoes, you know, and onions and stuff like that, see. And
Juanita, real quick, what was it like? I know that you and Dorothy were close because she was close to your age.
yeah,
A few years difference, right?
couple years,
That's all,
couple,
yeah.
2 years, 2 or 3
So
years.
you grew up with a niece, a lot like Dad grew up with Louis Kraft.
Well, sure.
You know,
Yeah.
because
did.
the ages, there were so many children.
Yeah,
And
right.
we were all like, she was like my cousin, you know,
Yeah,
actually.
well, that's the way we were, because
yeah.
we were the same age.
Age weren't that much.
Yeah,
And then
amazing.
Laura and Delorna were about the same age too, you know, that was my dad's sister.
Now, I want to ask you too quick, Juanita, because this thing will run out. Juanita, what was it that why Henrietta ended up naming you? Was it just the folks didn't have a name, or what was that?
She loved that name, Juanita, that's in the Golden Book of Songs.
There you go.
Grade school, so all had, you know, Plants come from, I don't know.
Interesting. Well, then did you all move back then together same time? And you ended up near Wyndham because you were married already to Clayton?
No, Roy and my dad and Roy farmed together. We moved to Alden, and there was some peat ground between Alden and Freeborn.
Well, you weren't married then down there.
Oh,
Of course
no.
not. If he was 6, you were only about 10 or 12.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
they married young back then, Ted.
Yeah, I know.
well, yeah, 19 and 20 we were when we got married.
19,
But,
20.
you see, we moved in, we lived in Alden, and I went to school there, to grade school, and Clayton's dad was a rural mail carrier in Fairmont, and the government said when you've worked so many years, you have to retire. So he took the family and moved to Albert Lee, or to Alden, where he set the family, and he had a second-hand store in Albert Lee, and that's where I met Clayton, was in Alden in high school.
Okay.
Well,
Never
didn't
heard
Lowell
this.
work in the telephone office there too at all?
Yeah, Lowell.
Yeah, she was a telephone operator in a telephone office. She worked there. I remember
And
that.
Walt delivered gas to the farmers
Yeah.
around, and then, of course, they got married, and so they lived in the telephone office, too.
Yeah.
There was a living compartment there.
And you ended up then in Albert Lee, and what year was that? You ended up married over to Albert Lee.
37.
37, and then Roy went back to Wyndham.
They moved back to Wyndham, yes.
Right.
And,
And Henrietta, of course, back to Lakefield area.
yeah.
So it was all since
And I can remember
37.
when Roy moved to Wyndham, I wasn't too old, but I went along with Roy, and he was looking for land around Wyndham, and they had this land out there that was north of Wyndham that was kind of a peat ground, and he figured it would work for potatoes
Yeah,
there, and then Roy bought that farm there that time.
Yeah, and they were there quite some years.
Oh, well, yeah, for the rest of their
Oh,
life.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, rest of their
Well,
life.
Roy ended up in a nursing home in Lakefield there. I mean, Wyndham there after a while. I went to see him there yet
Yeah.
when he was alive there.
But Josephine wanted to move into Wyndham. I'm not ready. Well, all of a sudden one day he come in and he says, "We're moving to town." Well, what brought this on? I can't lift the chains over the top of the tractor wheels anymore to plow out the snow.
Oh,
So they
there's
moved
always
in
one
on
thing
a
that they'd make the
duplex,
decision on.
or a townhouse, and then she died there when they lived in
Yes,
Wyndham.
and I remember that, yes.
And then Roy said, well, I can't live alone, so he was the one that went into this, in a private home, nursing home. What,
Now-
remember the name of it?
Juanita, real quick too, we visited Grandma Schmidt in the hospital, I'll never forget, the night before she passed. The next day then, she passed, you know, now that's, that would be your mother, of course.
Yeah.
She lived in the little brick house in Wyndham.
It wasn't brick, it was just frame. That was built out on the farm, and they moved
They moved it in?
it into town.
And Karen doesn't know this.
I helped him dig a basement there with the horses on a scraper.
They're in Wyndham to get that house in there?
I wasn't
It was right
very
down
old.
from my Grandpa Pence.
wasn't
And I
very
used to
old,
run
yeah.
down there on Sundays when we visit.
yeah.
And I asked Grandma, I got the guts up to ask Grandma Schmidt if she'd make me a Superman outfit, because I was gonna tie some jets on the back of my back and I wanted to fly like Superman. And then I never quite had the goal. She said she was couldn't quite get that done for me. She would always have us in for a cookie, because we were running back and forth right down the sidewalk.
Yeah,
Anyway, Juanita, where Roy lived out there, now there's a guy who lives north of Wyndham. His son lives in the building. On
Trap,
that trap, trap.
Yes.
And then after a while here, I suppose that patent maybe get run out
Yeah.
on the tail end, but here, some clowns right by me, I was living on Heron Lake there, were using that minnow.
That clover
trap, you
Oh,
know.
pretty famous trap.
Cloverleaf trap, and I
Trap got
and I
popular.
wondering, I said, what is going on here? Well, then, I don't know if it was to the point where they could do that or what, but here,
they probably stole them.
they stole them is probably what
Yeah.
happened, because, see, you'd put a bunch of them out there, and
Yeah.
then they'd get them, but I knew that there wasn't anybody had that trap, and I went and I said, what's the deal here with that minnow
Yeah.
trap, and there they had Clayton's traps there.
Sheesh.
If you'd opened the cover where they dumped the minnows out, you'd have seen the name.
Would have seen a little.
That's right, I remember that.
And everything in
Yeah.
there.
Yes, I remember that copyright type thing in there.
Yeah.
Because he ended up with a couple of those traps.
Yeah.
Or maybe he made his own in the garage. No.
Well, I could trap that way too.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Those traps, those clover leaves went up to Alaska then, and we trapped shrimp
I
in them.
know, that's what Bruce told me earlier.
There was
Can you
something
believe
with
that?
them, with the
That
way
was a
they
clever
were made.
design.
The way they
Such
were
a
made,
clever
I
design.
mean, that would get
was
Not just a one way, but it routed them in.
The outside, and they
The rest of
follow.
Narrowed them right in.
Well, and first
There
thing
they
they're
were.
in there, yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
Well, and then in Alaska also, Dad did the collapsible crab pots. Remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
He made those too.
Okay.
Hmm.
Got a
Bruce, I think
Patent on that.
there was two left that we had there, and Bruce, I told him, when I got rid of the house, I said, if you want any of this stuff, you take it. So he took those crab traps out.
Okay.
Do it and keep them because,
Yeah,
God,
it's one that Clayton designed and put together.
Yeah.
It was a bundle about like that, and then you opened it up, and it all snapped in place, and
Wow. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for reminiscing here.
Woody was, you know, somebody had to get the chores done, you know, and you were supposed to help and would, and then we'd come home in the afternoon and we had all the cows to milk and stuff. And then one time you and were going to fly a kite behind the pickup, and he was trying to run it on the road there, and one was driving it, and the other one you could have been dead.
That was me.
Yeah,
I was trying to fly a hang glider.
Yeah, I thought you could take off there on the road, running with it. That was kind of goofy. And then Willard Pullman, he'd come over all the time, see it.
Yeah.
And
And then the day we shot our dog.
yeah, and then he went to work and had a trap pocket gophers and stuff along our creek there. Willard did, and you know that Willard, I'd like to see him once.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Willard now for a long time. He's got to be alive yet. He's got to be somewhere. Danny,
What did Dan used to do?
he was.
Hunter.
Yeah, Danny loved to hunt, and he done this and done that, and we had the creek along there, so he could go down there and hunt along the creek and stuff like that. And Danny ended up down there by Big Spirit Lake. He lives on the lake there, and he still likes to go up into. Well, he went to Alaska too. Yet Danny did. He likes to travel around.
Oh, now what about the accidents? He had some close calls, didn't he?
Well,
Once when he was younger, trucks and cars.
yeah, he did. He was kind of lucky. He got.
I heard he was 7, 8 accidents.
Yeah, he was kind of, must have been a little bit rough on the driving because everything seemed to happen to him, and then he wouldn't, you know, it was always kind of accidents that happened. And I told him once, I says, you can't have all them accidents, you gotta cause some of them. You know, everything happens to you there, you know.
You have to cause a few.
So he had to be a fault of a few, but the good thing was he always come out of them where he, you know.
He lived, made
yeah,
it.
He made it, see.
He always said, when it's my time to go, I'll know it's time to go.
Yeah, so.
What about Penjo? Do you remember anything?
Well,
Penjo?
Penny, she was always on the go and a worker, and she is today. Penny works in a nursing home there in Wyndham, and I said to Penny, why do you stay in the nursing home? She says, I love to help those old people.
Yeah.
And she goes in there and drives, and then she got to go always in the evening. She got to work until I think 12 or 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and then she got to drive home, and then the road half the time in the winter is blocked with snow, and then she got to. Patrice is down there in Texas, and Pam, you know, they have,
They used to change their clothes
yeah.
all the time when they were little kids.
Oh, yeah, Pam always had a different one on.
Every 3 hours.
Yeah, and then she'd have another one, see, and a new one, and then her mother left her get by with it because I guess she wanted to dress flashy or whatever, you know.
And Wilbur, do you remember Wilbur in Reading? He had to have his little room perfect.
Oh, yeah, he was fussy too, see. But that was the difference in the kids, see. Now, you was a regular, didn't make any difference what the room looked like, see. But
Yeah.
That was a difference.
I've got one at home that's like that.
Yeah.
Doesn't care much about how the room looks.
See, and But that's the difference it's supposed to be different. They aren't all alike. Children aren't alike.
Right.
Heck, no. And, but they all turned out good, and that's the main thing, that they, know the Lord and things like that.
You
That's
got
the
it.
important thing.
You got it.
That's the important thing, because nowadays you have, you hear of so many of them getting into troubles and on drugs and things like that, and then it's sad, then kids have troubles.
Tell me, now, you gotta tell me a little bit tell about when you played music. You played that
Well,
music
I played
when you were little.
I played music when I was 5 years old already. My dad had an old accordion laying there, so I learned to play the accordion, and I could play anything. When I was 7, 8 years old, a teacher made me bring the accordion to school. I had to play for the kids, and then they had a Christmas program in our country school, and I had to play for that, accordion a little bit.
Wilder.
And then I had to go to play in a Wilder with a couple of guys. The folks knew the guys, and I was 10 years old, and then I had to play in Wilder at Wilder Hall. There was just a hole in the wall. That Wilder town is about 300 people lived in at that time, but they had dances in there, see, and they could use an extra accordion player, and this was in the Depression days when there was no money, and they would pay me $5 if I'd go and play with them, and the folks said, do it, because $5 in those days was like gold. See, and so then they took the $5 and they gave me maybe a quarter out of it, but I played there when I was 10 years old, and I played them dances in the winter. And then there was an old boy there. He come from Russia. They called him the Russian. And he stayed with a guy in Wilder there. He was a short guy, wasn't married. And I remember then they'd take a break when we was playing, and they had an old big pot-bellied stove out there, and that stove got they fired her up because it was cold in the winter, and that got pretty hot. Well, then he jumps on the guy's back, this Russian does, just fooling around her, and he backs him up against that stove. But he had a coat on, and that darn coat smoked, and he pulled the coat off, and you thought he was going to burn up. But all that goofy stuff in them. But for $5, I'd go over there and play.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of money for them, they could get $5 for that. So I'd done that quite a bit. I played when I was 10 years old.
Tell about when you walked to school. You had to walk in snow, did you?
Oh, yes. We were a mile and a half from school, and then it was horse and buggy days, and then if our dad got us from school or took us to school, it was with a bobsled in the winter, because the roads, he wouldn't drive on the roads at all. He just had the old Model T and stuff, and then Pa would haul us with a bobsled to school, see, and pick us up to the country school down there where Woody lives, south of there, see. And then we'd go visiting at night with the horses on a bobsled, and then they'd put the horses in the barn. They'd visit till 12 o'clock and hitch them up and go home. And you went with the horses those days because the roads were full of snow, and then the older cars, they just didn't bother opening roads like they do now. And so we drove with a lot with the horses.
Mention a little bit about Irvin.
Oh, and then my brother Irvin, he got this crippling arthritis when he was 3 years old. He was a year and a half younger than me, but he got that crippling arthritis, and he told, I can remember that. I was about 4. But anyway, Irvin, he was a going little character. Well, we got pictures at home when he was 3 years old, And all of a sudden, one day, he says to Ma, my leg hurts, my leg hurts, my leg hurts. Yeah, Ma thought, leg hurts, sure. And she tried to help him, And then it didn't take a year, and he got crippled, so he couldn't walk. The way his legs were, when you sit, that's the way they got stiff, and he got to be skin and bones. And then he died when he was 9 years old. But they had to carry him everywhere he went, and he couldn't go to school, see. But the little character, when Dorothy and I come from school, my older sister, then we'd have our books and our lessons and stuff, That little bugger, he was just as smart as we was, just from that. They didn't have school them days where they could send him to like they do now, you know. He just had to stay home, see. But he was smart, but then 9 years old, then they took him up to that Gillette hospital in the cities. They were supposed to help him there, you know. They thought they could help him. That hospital is there today yet, in the cities. And they took him up there in August, and the next February he dies up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the end of him there, see it, so early was gone.